60 years old, still getting crushes on other men's wives.
Now and then.
Nobody's Fool.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm John, and today we're here to talk about the 1994 Robert Benton directed, Paul Newman starring film, Nobody's Fool, and we're also here to talk about its new 4K Blu-ray from Kino Lorber. But before we dive into all that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, some tech and game reviews along the way, nothing helps the channel out more than by you liking this video and subscribing to the channel. So Nobody's Fool was released in 1994, is directed by Robert Benton, is written by Robert Benton, and is based off the 1993 novel by Richard Russo, also called Nobody's Fool. And this film stars Paul Newman, Bruce Willis, Melanie Griffith, Jessica Tandy in her final role, and a young Philip Seymour Hoffman in a very small role. I think this might be the first time on the channel we've actually ever talked about Paul Newman. He's one of the greatest actors of all time in the 60s and 70s, and then in the 80s. In the 60s and 70s, such as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Cool Hand Luke. You know, Paul Newman was the biggest actor of his time. Him and Robert Redford were really gunning for who was the #1 actor during their generation. Then as the 80s came along, Paul Newman started to transition into some older roles where he plays like older men. Finally won him his Academy Award. The Martin Scorsese film, The Color of Money with Tom Cruise, which I'm back. Really love. I think that's a very underrated Scorsese movie, a very underrated Paul Newman movie. And then he started doing such films as The Verdict, which I think is his best movie of all time. And then even as he got older, he did Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks, which I think is also another really great movie. And he plays a smaller role in that, but it's still Paul Newman. Paul Newman is just a phenomenal actor, and in 1994's Nobody's Fool is just no different. He really is the shining star of this movie. And this film follows around Paul Newman's character of Donald Sullivan, who they all call Sully, in a small town in upstate New York, where basically everybody knows everybody. Unfortunately, Sully kind of has this problem where he's kind of failed at life. He's a deadbeat father, he can never hold down a job, and his life has just been a struggle, but everyone seems to really like him, and everybody in this town really seems to like him or know him, even though they know he's kind of a scumbag and is really just kind of looking out for himself, and he doesn't know how to commit to anything, and he has a hard time showing emotions. When the going gets tough, Sully gets going. He abandoned his family when his son was 1 year old, and he's kind of just been drifting along through this town his entire life. He does construction, but at this point in his life, he's an older man. You know, his knees are starting to go. And then on one fateful day, his car breaks down. But who happens to pick him up but his son, played by Dylan Walsh, along with his wife and their 2 kids, who don't even realize that's their grandfather. Because Paul Newman doesn't have a relationship with his son and their family, he rents an apartment from Jessica Tandy's character, which I think she is phenomenal in this movie.
Does it ever bother you that you haven't done more with the life God gave you?
Jessica Tandy is one of the greatest actresses of all time, and this is one of her final roles, if not her final role. Her relationship with Paul Newman is my favorite relationship in this movie, because we're following around Paul Newman and all of his relationships in town, whether it be with his best friend, his son, Philip Seymour Hoffman's cop character. We just see all his relationships, but my favorite relationship is his relationship with Jessica Tandy. She's the one who's really kind of bringing out the emotions in him, because he can blow anyone else off, but he really does care about her because she really does care about him. She sees the good in him. She knows that deep down, you know, this guy wants to do the right thing. He's just, you know, he's his own worst enemy. And we see throughout the film what causes him to be that kind of person, who his father was, because he owns his father's old house, the house he grew up in. He doesn't pay the back taxes on it. That's still his family's house, and he refuses to sell it, even though it would help him and get him along in life and give him a bigger boost to his life. But because of what that house represents to him, he just can't allow that to be a positive in his life. It's only a negative. He only sees it as a negative, and that's really what reflects on the rest of relationships, especially his relationship with his son, played by Dylan Walsh. And unfortunately, I believe that Dylan Walsh is the weakest part of this entire cast, because he plays his son who doesn't have a relationship with his father, but he plays this role so very light-hearted that it's kind of hard to understand that he's trying to say, oh, I hate you, you weren't there, but he plays it like, oh, you know, kind of, oh, shucks, like about it. Like, you know, I know you weren't there for me, but I don't care. And even like when he brings up like, oh, you have a closer relationship with my son, but you couldn't do that for me, the way he brings it up, it just feels like, almost like he's reading lines, and I just feel like he's just the weakest part of this cast, and I feel bad saying that because I do like him, and it does drag the movie down a little bit for me every time he's on screen, because I just don't believe that he's as angry as he seems to be saying, or he's trying to let on. He just feels like it's like kind of just like, you know, it's whatever, it is what it is. I know you weren't there for me, but it's fine. I don't mind working with you. And that's just the only relationship that kind of does bother me throughout this film, is their relationship, like, and that's a big part of the movie, so that does kind of drag down my love for this film. Even though Paul Newman, like I said, is phenomenal, and he's in almost every scene in this movie, so he does a great job and does a lot of the heavy lifting, and he is just magnetic on the screen. He did receive a Best Actor nomination for this, and it's well deserved. Now, this is the same year that Tom Hanks won for Forrest Gump, and
Now that's Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan!
I still would probably give the Academy Award to Tom Hanks, but Paul Newman is great in this movie. I just love his character. And another thing that's really funny in this movie is Bruce Willis is in this movie in a very small role.
Hey, Don Sullivan, thief of snowblowers, poisoner of dogs, secret father and grandfather.
And I love seeing Bruce Willis do a role like this. It's not an action movie role. He's kind of behind a desk a lot of the time. You get to see that old comedy Bruce Willis that we saw in the 80s, where he's just kind of having a good time there. You know, he's just really a big part of this town. And it's really funny because this movie starts off with Paul Newman suing the Tip Top construction company that Bruce Willis actually owns. After Paul Newman loses that suit, he goes right back in there and, you know, starts looking for work again because Bruce Willis knows the deal. And Bruce Willis and him, they have a relationship just like Paul Newman has a relationship with Bruce Willis's wife. And yet at night, Bruce Willis, Paul Newman's lawyer, they all hang out, a one-legged lawyer, he says. They all hang out at the bar together, drinking, having a good time. So this town is so small that the cops, the lawyers, everyone who owns all the businesses, Paul Newman, they all get together in the bar at night, no matter what's going on. They still hang out because that's just that real, raw, small town feel. And they really knock it out of the park in this, where just everybody knows everybody and everybody cares about everybody. And we can just let that go, even though this seems to be a bit of a dysfunctional community. But the love deep down for everybody and the willingness to do something for everybody is all there. And I just feel like this is kind of one of those 90s light-hearted films where the score is done amazingly by Howard Shore, who worked almost all the time with David Cronenberg and has also worked on the such scores as Big, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He worked on Silence of the Lambs, Philadelphia. So his score does sound familiar, and it really does ring as one of those 90s scores that you probably heard like a million times. That really does help to add to that light-hearted feeling of the film and let you know that the stakes are never too high, and it's a problem that's easy to solve, but you're just there for that nice story that, you know, it's going to leave a smile on your face at the end of the film, and it really does make you feel good. It's a feel-good film, in my opinion, and I really did feel good coming out of this. Like I said, it's not the greatest movie I've ever seen. I think this is one of those movies that if you ever need like a palate cleanser, you're having a bad day, you throw this movie on every couple of years, and I think it'll bring a smile to your face. And I'm really glad that Kino Lorber actually has released this on 4K Blu-ray, so let's talk about that now. So I actually don't believe this was ever released on Blu-ray. I was doing some research. There was a Blu-ray released overseas, I believe, last year, but I think that's still this scan. But I don't think through the entire run of Blu-rays this was ever released on Blu-ray. I think the last physical release for this was on DVD, which is very surprising because this is a popular film. And like I said, Paul Newman got nominated for Best Actor for this, so at some point you would have thought this would have came to Blu-ray. Apparently it didn't. I may be wrong, but through all my research, I couldn't find any previous release of this. So thankfully, Kino Lorber has graced us with a beautiful 4K. So before we dive into the visuals and the audio and all the extras on here, let's look at the packaging. So it's a standard Kino Lorber release, which I have said before, I really like the package design that they go for because you can put all your Kinos together on their shelf. They got that silver bar up top. You slide off that slipcover underneath. It's the same box art. You open it up. Inside, you get your two discs, a 4K disc and a Blu-ray disc. And that Blu-ray disc is the same as the 4K disc. It's the same exact scan, which is a 2020 scan from Paramount. It's just a compressed down to 1080p version of that same exact 4K, but that scan was done in 2020, so now it's just getting released here at the end of 2022. And all your extras will be on that Blu-ray disc, except for a commentary track that is on the 4K disc. And as far as the extras go, it's very limited extra. There's some on there. There's 2 interviews, an audio commentary track, and there's a bunch of trailers, including Twilight from 1998, which is another Robert Benton film that also stars Paul Newman that I've actually never seen, and I think is getting a Kino Lorber release this year or already does. I'm not 100% sure on that. I just know that it has a release either coming or has already come out that I really want to check out because I did watch the trailer on here, which I never do, but I recognize the name, so I was like, I wonder what that's about since I've never seen it before. But really, as far as extras, it's pretty bare bones, which Kino Lorber really doesn't do the best with the extras, and they do have a pretty high price point, so if I'm gonna knock Universal for how they released Tar with no extras and charging a really premium price point, because I think right now this is $36 off of Amazon, so that's a very high price. But this is a boutique studio release, so they usually put a little more effort than your regular studio releases like Universal, so it's a little more understandable, but $36 is pretty high. But how are the visuals on this? Well, I can honestly say that every other time I've ever seen Nobody's Fool, it's looked pretty bad, honestly. I'm not going to sit here and lie, but I've only ever watched it on streams because I didn't catch up to this movie until I was already an adult, so I've only ever watched this on, I'm not too sure, either Prime Video or Hulu or one of those, whatever had it on there over the years. I've only ever watched it on that, so every time I've ever seen this movie, it's never looked great. It's never sounded great, and when I put the 4K on last night, yeah, it pretty much blew me away how good the visuals are. Now, this movie takes place in upstate New York in the winter, so there's snow on the ground the entire time. The small town feel is beautiful. There's a diner that we see in the opening credits and then we see later in the movie, and the diner sign, it has this red neon lighting around it, and right away that just pops off your screen. Just seeing that, and then the snow just looks gorgeous. It doesn't look like, like an off-white like you might see in a lot of movies. No, it's that pure white snow that the 4K HDR10 that's on here, Dolby Vision really helped to just enhance it. Yes, this has HDR10 Plus on here and Dolby Vision. It's in its original aspect ratio of 1.85, so you're not going to have black bars on the top and bottom. This is going to fill out your screen, and it really does look gorgeous. I compared it to the Blu-ray in here, which is the same exact scan, and this Blu-ray has also been released by Kino Lorber, and I think that's only like $18. Is it a big jump from that Blu-ray to the 4K? Actually, I thought the Blu-ray looked really nice, and the 4K, yeah, it does look better because of the Dolby Vision and the HDR. Like I was saying earlier with that diner sign, it's very noticeable in a scene like that where the Dolby Vision is doing work. And there's also other scenes, like certain indoor scenes where it's, the lighting isn't the greatest, mainly when we're in Sully's childhood house, that the Dolby Vision and the HDR do a lot more work to help with the contrast and make the colors look a little bit brighter on the 4K than they do on the Blu-ray. But if you've never seen this film before and you're just looking to see it and you're not a big fan of 4Ks, I can recommend that Blu-ray because it is a very nice Blu-ray. And you do get it in here, which is really good if you're a fan of having both the 4K and the Blu-ray. But if you just want that Blu-ray, it is very nice. And if you're not a quality snob like myself, unfortunately, where I'm going to know the little differences in the 4K and the Blu-ray, I can recommend that Blu-ray because it is a really nice scan just overall done by Paramount. Everything looks good. The skin tones, that's really a big deal where the 4K I think really helps. There's a lot of scenes when they're in the bar and you're really close up, on Paul Newman or Bruce Willis's face, and like their skin, you see every little detail on it. Paul Newman has those gorgeous baby blue eyes and they just pop off your screen as well every time they're in the bar. So the skin tones, that's another thing. It's not as noticeable how good the skin tones are on the Blu-ray because of the lower resolution, but when you upgrade to that 4K and that Dolby Vision, that's where you're going to see the noticeable differences when you go from Blu-ray to 4K. So I think that is the biggest thing about going from Blu-ray to 4K is the Dolby Vision and HDR are really going to help with these little things from scene to scene, but it's not going to make a huge difference. It's just for the people who are going to notice it. So I can recommend both the Blu-ray and the 4K from a visual standpoint. Now, audio-wise, you get a DTS HD 5.1. You also get a mono track on there, which is also DTS. And I thought it did a pretty good job. This is a very much a dialogue-driven film with a good score underneath it. Really does help to set the tone of this film, and I thought the DTS 5.1 did a good job with that. The dialogue was never too low compared to the score. Everything seemed to be balanced perfectly. The mix that was done on this, I think, was done really well. You could put your remote down with this one. You don't have to worry about going from one scene where it's too loud to the next scene being too low, where you can't hear the dialogue that's going on. No, everything was perfect as far as that goes. This is not an action movie, so you don't have to worry about the need for an Atmos track. I think it would have been unnecessary, so I understand why this film went with just Dolby Vision and didn't have the Dolby Atmos on there. I completely understand because the track that's on here is really good. It's not a track that's going to blow you away, and it's not supposed to, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. You just want to make sure that the levels are good, it's mixed right, and that score comes in crystal clear, and I can promise you that it does. So overall, what would I rate this out of 10? Well, I think it's a really good film with some good packaging, with a huge visual upgrade from what I've ever seen it before, and you get that Blu-ray included with that with some extras. I would still probably give this a pretty solid 8 out of 10. That price point alone is just a little hard for me to give this a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 because that's really high priced for something like this where you're really not going to get much extras. Like Criterion or Arrow. And that is the one big unfortunate thing, because I really do think this is a film that's pretty popular, and I think a lot of people are going to want to see it, given Paul Newman has passed away at this point. But it would be nice to get some interviews, you know, with some of the actors or actresses that are in this film, or anyone who helped to produce this film, and just get their thoughts looking back on it. We get some interviews, but I don't think it's enough to really drive home that $36 price point that's going for right now. Now, I do expect that to drop in price, and eventually at like the $26, $27 price point, that's probably where it really would fit in with the other Kino Lorber 4Ks, because like I've said before, Kino Lorber's visual transfers are really some of the best in the 4K field right now. It's honestly unbelievable what they do, because some of the 4Ks that came out from this year, I have never seen a bad one. All their 4Ks have all looked good. Now, they actually do have like a similar tone with how they do it, how their 4Ks are released, and I really do think they do just amazing work. Kino Lorber, like, if Kino Lorber's putting something out, I know that the quality is good. I don't have to worry about there being a lower quality 4K coming out from them. I know what I'm getting, and I know it's going to be good, and, you know, for a company like that, you can appreciate the fact that they really do pay attention to quality. I just would have liked a little bit more extras and just a little bit lower of a price, and I would have gave this a higher grade. So overall, this is an 8 out of 10. I can recommend the film. If you're looking for a feel-good movie, check this one out. Grab that Kino Lorber 4K, and if you do want to grab it, we will leave a link to our Amazon affiliate account in the description below. If you want to grab it through there, it costs no extra money for you, and it really does help the channel out. Another thing that helps the channel out is just by liking this video and then running out in the streets and telling all your friends.